Hey everybody, welcome to my basic walkthrough video where I demonstrate how to go from absolutely nothing to a very basic functioning touch panel file created with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you don't already have the completed source code, make sure and check out the link below for access to that. Let me know your thoughts or anything down in the comments section. And also if you'd like to receive notifications of any new videos that I make like this, make sure and go ahead and hit the subscribe button as well. So without further ado, let's get started.
So first thing we're going to do is if you don't have Node.js installed, you need to make sure and download that and install it. You can use any of the installers depending on the operating system you're using. And the other thing you're going to need is Visual Studio Code. I've seen some discussions asking if this is different than Visual Studio 2019. Yes, it is. Visual Studio Code is used by people in the web dev community. It's just that you could use whatever code editor you want technically, but most of us use Visual Studio Code. So once you have all that downloaded and installed, go to a terminal or command prompt and type node-v. We're going to do that just to make sure that it is installed. All right, so now that I know it's installed, I'm going to make a new folder that we're going to put our project in. So I'm going to do this and call it YouTube. All right, and then I'm going to go into that folder. Okay, so now that I'm in that folder, by the way, I'm just recording this and as is just to kind of make it real quick for everybody. So if I screw up while I'm talking, sorry. Yeah, I also apologize for the horrible video and audio quality because I'm not in my studio. So now I'm going to type npm init. And what npm init does is going to create the package.json file that we're going to use to put things in. It holds the dependencies, things like that. All right. And so this is just going to pop up. You can literally just hit enter on all these. Entry point is index.js for us. Like that. And then type yes. Okay. So that is basically all you have to do to get started. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open this project in Visual Studio Code. I'm not sure, I think you have to do something extra on a Windows machine for this command to work. On Mac it kind of just works. Obviously on this demo I'm using a Mac, but most of this translates to Windows with a few minor differences. I honestly don't really know what those differences are because I've pretty much just been a Mac guy. So I'm just going to type code and period. And what that's going to do is it's going to go ahead and open the project in Visual Studio Code. All right. Let's go ahead and resize this a little bit. Actually, shortcut, let's do this. Just for anyone who uses Mac, I use this program here. It's called Magnet, and it allows you to do real quick shortcuts so you can arrange things on your desktop real easy. It's a fantastic program. Shout out to Magnet for that. All right, so now we're in this folder, and you can see pretty much all we have is this package.json file. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is if you're starting from complete scratch, you've never installed VS Code, you've never used it, things like that. So we're going to want to click this little 4-box thing and it's the extensions. Extensions are pieces that you add into Visual Studio Code that allow for formatting the text, formatting your code, IntelliSensing things, stuff like that. If you're going to use Crestron's component library, obviously in this demo I'm not, I'm just doing bare bones, but if you are, then just type Crestron in here, and you're going to want to make sure and install Crestron components. That will allow it to autocomplete stuff like that. Some of the other ones I use, Prettier, Prettier is a kind of a code formatter. So on a Mac, you can hit Shift Option F, and it will format your code real nice. Instead of tabbing and doing all that kind of stuff, you can just kind of type away, hit Shift Option F, and it'll just fix it all for you. Some of the other ones I recommend, npm IntelliSense, if I can spell. This helps some of the node stuff. Same thing with path IntelliSense. Path IntelliSense allows you, so if you start entering passive files, it'll know it and just start automatically filling it up. And the other one is HTML snippets. HTML snippets. And that's the other one you can use. Just also, if you're ever curious what you have installed, you can click this 3-dot and say show installed, and it'll show you all the extensions that you have installed. Okay. So now that we have all that, we're going to lay out our folder structure for this. So I'm going to say create a file, and I'm going to call it index.html. And then I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to call this folder assets. So assets are going to be where you store your CSS files, your JavaScript files. If you're putting any images onto the project itself, they would go in an IMG folder. But if you're referencing it from somewhere else like Unsplash or something like that, then you don't really need that. So I'm going to say assets. I'm going to create a new folder in that, and I'm going to call it CSS. And I'm going to create another folder, call it JS. And just for example purposes, I'm going to create one called IMG. All right. So the next thing up is we're going to create the CSS file. So I'm going to say new file, and I'm going to call this styles.css. Okay. And I'm going to come into the JS folder, and I'm going to create the JavaScript file. Now this is important, especially with Node, because we told it our start is index.js. Technically, I don't think this matters, but because we're using something else. Okay, so we have our 3 files. We have our index.html, our index.js, and our styles.css. Okay, and obviously they're all empty. So the next thing that I want to go over is how to start installing the dependencies. So dependencies are exterior libraries that you're going to bring in to use in your project. These exterior libraries, there are gazillions of them. And great website for that is npmjs.com. So npmjs.com is basically a website where you can search for packages. The package will have examples and documentation, how to install it, things like that. So for this project, we basically have 2 packages. One is actually Crestron's library, and the other one is something I will explain here shortly. So I'm inside the folder, so I'm going to type npm I. You can also type npm install. If you're a Yarn user, you could use Yarn. Yarn is basically another thing like npm, which is it's technically called Node Package Manager, but I don't think they really call it that. So I'm going to type npm install, and then the name of the Crestron communication library is @Crestron /ch5 crcomm lib. And what that's going to do, it's going to go out and it's going to download all the files for that, and it's going to make a new folder on your computer. Okay. I'll clear that out. Okay. And the other thing that we're going to need for this project is something called parcel. So what parcel is, if you've looked at the example files from Crestron, they use something called Webpack. Webpack is a very robust packaging and bundling and building solution for web developers. For our instance, we're going very basic, we're going very simple. So we're just going to use Parcel. Parcel pretty much handles everything we need in a very simple manner. So we're going to type npm I parcel bundler, and we're going to add some extra stuff on the end of this. So we're going to say save dash dash save dash dev. So what that does is it basically says that this is basically a development dependency. So it's only going to use it when we're running it. When we build it, it's going to ignore it and not include it in any of the files it uses in the build. And I'll show you where you can see that. So we'll hit enter. One other thing I want to mention with this while this downloads is if you're doing a lot of this, right? So if you're making a lot of stuff with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, things like that, you can actually just globally install this package so it's always available no matter what project you're in. The only difference with what I typed is you would remove the dash dash save dash dev and replace it with dash G, which means global. Sometimes you'll experience issues with that on your computer because of access rights. So for instance, on Mac, you just type sudo and then that. So it would be sudo npm i-g parcel bundler. So that command there would basically globally install parcel for any project you work on. So you don't have to do the dash dash save dash dev every single time. All right. And that's it. That's all we have to install for this project. All right. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So now if I go down here, I have my package.json file. You see here we have some new sections, right? We have this dependency section, which basically says that the Crestron communication library is a dependency in this. And we have dev dependencies. Dev dependencies basically means that's only used during development phase. Once you run the build process, this package gets completely ignored at that point. So most of the time, what you'll see in here is just things you're using during development, not something you actually need in your live stuff. All right. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create some scripts. So what scripts are is basically where you can combine stuff so you don't have to type it in the terminal every time. So I'm going to create one called start. And in start, what we're going to do is we're going to run parcel and then index.html. So what parcel index.html does basically says parcel, build this program and start a server so that I can access it from a web browser. Same manner as if you were loading a website to a server and then you go to that server. So same way Google any of that works. The other nice thing about parcel is it's going to automatically rebuild every time you make a change to a file. So if you're going in and changing one little thing in your HTML, your CSS, or JavaScript, it's going to automatically rebuild and show that update in the browser without you ever having to hit refresh. All right, so the next one we're going to make is build. And this one is parcel build index.html. And we have to add another flag here. So public URL dot. The public URL dot is very important because what will happen is if you don't use this, Parcel will put a slash in front of the link sources in your HTML file for the JavaScript and CSS and everything, and it basically won't work. You'll load it to your touch panel, and it won't see the CSS, it won't see the JavaScript. It'll look like a 1990 website. It'll be bad. So you have to do that public URL dot so that basically it tells Parcel when it builds it to remove that slash. All right. The other one we're going to do is build archive. So what build archive does is it's going to make the touch panel file to load to your touch panel. So we're going to do ch5-cli. I kind of realized I didn't tell you need to install that, but if you go to the Crestron documentation, they go over how to install the command, the ch5 CLI, which is basically their command line utility that takes what build does and then turns it into the archive for the touch panel. Archive, -p. So after -p is going to be the name that you want the file to be called. So you can name this whatever you want. So I'll just name it example. All right. -d. So what -d basically does is it says, okay, the where do you want to output the file? So what folder? All right, and we're going to say dist. Sorry, I said that wrong. Like I said, one take. -d actually asks you where the build is. -o is where what folder you want to output it in. So ch5-cli archive -p is the name of the file. So the file, when we run this command, is basically going to make an example.ch5z. -d is the folder that the build process puts everything in. So parcel will put it in the dist folder. And -o is the folder you want to output it to. Technically, you can call this folder whatever you want. I just, by default, just name mine tsw, so I know that's where the tsw file is. All right. And then hit Command S or Control S if you're on Windows to save the file. And then we can close it. All right, so that is it. We are ready to now move from getting everything ready to actually now going into our index.html, doing our CSS, doing our JavaScript. So in the next clip, I'm going to start with the HTML. All right, so now let's get into the nitty gritty. So I have my editor open. Actually, let me bump this font up a little bit so it's easier for you to see. So over here on the left-hand side, so I have all 3 tabs open right now, but if you don't want all 3 tabs open, you just do that. So you just choose the file you want. You can actually just hit this little file icon and it'll shrink it back down. So all you see is the the file you're working on. So first things first is we got to get the boilerplate up. Every HTML page has a boilerplate. Visual Studio Code will automatically fill this in for you. So if I just type HT, I can go down here and choose HTML-5. I click that, and it's going to drop all this boilerplate stuff in here. That's basically the guts. So if you're running this in a browser, like on a regular HTML file, this title is what shows up in the tab. So I'm just going to say ch5 example. Doesn't really matter for your touch panel file because obviously they don't see this. The browser runs in full screen. All right. So next up, what we're going to do is we are going to create some aspects inside of our body. So the body inside the HTML is where all the pieces go that show up on the screen, right? So if you haven't taken some kind of online course on HTML or CSS, I highly recommend it. I know a lot has been going out for Brad Traversy. He's really great. Check out his stuff on Udemy as well. Just to show you, that is UDEMY. And he has, besides all his free stuff on YouTube, he has a whole bunch on here. Another one that I recommend is a website called Front End Masters. Another great resource for learning this stuff. It's a yearly fee. I use Front End Masters all the time, even when I can't remember something. Besides that, Stack Overflow and Google are your best friends. Pretty much anything you can't remember, just Google it, you'll find it. I honestly, on my machine in my office, I keep like 20 browser tabs open, just to remind myself when I'm doing something. I just keep certain things open all the time. Oop, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, again, live. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an H1 tag. So in Visual Studio Code, it'll auto-complete it. It'll throw the end of it out there for you. So I'm going to say basics of CH5 comm library. All right. And then for the first example, I'm just going to make a button, right? And I'm just going to call this button. And that's it. Technically, if we run this, it will work, right? It's not going to look very pretty, but it's going to work. Before I run it, though, I'm going to go ahead and actually, let's just run it and see what happens, just for giggles. So you can use the integrated terminal in Visual Studio Code. I personally don't use it because I do so much development with front end and back end. On a Mac, I'll have multiple terminal sessions open with multiple tabs. So again, to run this, remember we made that script inside of the package.json, so I can just run npm run start. And you'll see it says the command parcelindex.html. It builds it, and you'll notice here it says server running at this, right? So if I go into my browser, I can say http localhost 1234, and voila, there it is. Again, not pretty. There's no CSS styles applied to anything. This is just straight up raw HTML and what it looks like. The Chrome basically chooses what the default look is if you don't have any CSS applied. All right. So now that we got that, let's get ready to then let's add some styling, right? So I'm going to open up my styles CSS file. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do :root. Root is basically the root of the HTML. So this will apply to anything. And what I'm going to do in here is create some variables for colors. Now the reason I do that is so that as I'm developing using CSS, I don't have to keep looking back at what the specific hex value was or what the specific color was or the RGB values for a color. I can just reference the name, right? So the first one I'm going to do is //bg, and that is RGBA. What RGBA is, so I'm going to do 25, 59, 102, 0.10. So what RGB, the difference between RGB and RGBA is RGBA also includes the alpha, so the transparency level. So in this instance, I'm taking the color that comes from 25, 59, and 102 and making it only 10% transparent. All right, oops. And then at the end of every line of CSS, you have to make sure and put a semicolon in. It will yell at you if you don't. So the next one I'm going to call main, RGBA, and that's 20, 121, 255, and 1. If I'm doing RGB, I just go ahead and do RGBA. Reason being is it just makes it easier down the road, and also in the browser when I show you how to modify CSS in real time, just makes it easier if I want to mess with the alpha, because obviously the alpha will change how the color looks. And there are tons of design articles and things like that on color scheming and things like that. So the next one I'm going to call is main pressed, RGBA, and this one is 164, 192, 228, and actually I believe in the source code I just use RGB on here, so I'm just going to go ahead and change it in the video to RGBA. All right, the next one is font, RGBA, and that's 25, 59, 104, 1. Then I'm going to make one called font accent. Also notice the naming scheme that I'm using. You never want to use anything in CSS that capitalizes the first letter. Everything needs to be camel case. Camel case basically means first letter is always lowercase. Any word after that is uppercase, and no spaces. In coding world, spaces are no-nos. And this one is 0.3 for its transparency. And then I have button font, RGBA. And you can name these variables whatever you want. Always name them something that makes sense, so that you know when you're building your stuff, it's easy to remember. All right, so that's my root, right? I hit save. Obviously nothing changes in the browser because nothing's there. So next I'm gonna make styles to the body. So this one, so for instance in this CSS, it's just called body. That basically means it's applying it to the body of the HTML. So I'm gonna do background color, and so I want to use var, and what var says is use the variable that I've created. So I just do dash dot dash dash bg, and when I hit save, it's basically saying use this variable for the background color. I'm going to do color var dash dash font. What the color CSS is the text color, the font color. And I'm not doing font family yet. Font family is used for when I do the other stuff. All right. So the next one I'm adding is button and focus. This I have to add because otherwise when you press the buttons it puts this little weird white square box around it. So we have to do that just to override. All right. So that's it. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to make some classes. Classes are how you apply specific formatting to elements inside of HTML. So every class in CSS starts with dot. So I do dot demo. Again, this class you can name it whatever you want. It doesn't have to be demo. You can call it, source button or volume buttons or whatever you want. So for this one, I'm going to say background color, and again var dash dash main, which then tells it to go up to the root and choose that main variable. Border of 0 because I don't want the button to have a border. I just want it to be edge to edge the same color. Border radius. So what border radius does, so if I don't have border radius, the button's just a square. When I apply a border radius to us, it kind of gives it that rounded look. All right, color. Again, this is the text color that's going to be inside this button. So if I don't put color here, it's going to use the color from the body. But I made two different colors. I made a font color and a button font color. All right. And then I'm just going to make this button 50 pixels by 100 pixels. And I'm going to apply a box shadow. So what a box shadow is it kind of gives that kind of partially raised look to the button. There are plenty of websites out there where you can actually mess with it, and it will generate these values for you, so you don't have to know what everything means. It's nice to know what everything means, but I just use a generator to kind of mess with it and figure out what I like, and that's what I use. All right, so this basically, the first four are where the shadow sits, and then the last one is the color of the shadow. So 0.000.22. So it basically means the color black with 22% transparency. All right. So the next CSS property I'm going to put in is .demo/active. Notice that this changes. So this colon .active. So what that does is it basically tells the HTML when you press this button and it's known as active in HTML, I want you to change these specific properties of that button. So I'm going to do background color. I'm going to do var again, and this one is called main pressed. And then the other one is color black. So what that does basically is it says, okay, if you press this button, when you press it and it's known as active, I want you to change the background color to this value and change the text color to this value. What that does, it gives the effect of you pushing the button. So think in Visual Studio Pro world like your pressed state of a button. So .demo is going to be your normal, and .demo active is going to be your pressed. All right. I'm going to do my best to kind of translate how this all would make sense in Visual Studio Pro world. So the next class I'm going to make is .demo active. Right. So in Visual Studio Pro, this would be your selected button state. So I'm going to change the background color. I just realized I did not make this a variable, which I should have. I will update that. And I do this all the time. I accidentally hit periods instead of commas. And it drives me nuts because then I have to, I'm like, why didn't it work? So the text color is going to be black. I want the same height and the same width. But obviously, you can change this, right? If you want to button to look like it shrinks a little bit when you press it, you can change these height and width values and it'll look like it is shrunk when you press it. So again, I want the same box shadow, but again, if I wanted it completely different shadow, so it has a different effect, or if I want to remove the shadow, I just take that out. And again, I want border of 0 and border radius of 10 pixels. All right. And that's it. So that's that's everything we need in our styles.css, right? Okay, so the other thing you do is if you want to apply something to an entire button, right? You could just do button width 100px, height 50px. And so what that's going to do is it's going to apply that styling to every button tag you have in your HTML. So if you want every button to start out as 50 pixels high by 100 pixels wide, you do this. And then any button that you don't want that size is where you apply that styling in it. But as you probably notice, my site has not changed at all, right? And that's because in the index.html, we haven't told it where to get it. So we actually now have to go in and link our CSS and our JavaScript files into the HTML so it knows where to go and get them. So your CSS, if you're pulling any fonts, any external libraries, stuff like that, that all goes in the head. I do put my JavaScript somewhere else though. So this is a link, and we need rel, and this is a style sheet, which basically tells this link you're going to pull in a style sheet. And then we give it an href, which tells it where to go find it. So I do a /, and now because I have path IntelliSense on Visual Studio Code, it's looking at my folder structure. So I can say it's under assets, it's under CSS, and it's the styles.css folder. And then I'm going to do a closing tag, and I hit save. Now, the one time you do have to refresh your browser is the first time with parcel is the first time you load CSS, right? Because I just did that and nothing has changed. And something should, right? Because I have a special font color applied to the body. I have a background color applied to the body, which should make this change. So now if I hit refresh, you see it changed. You also see the button change size because I have this button 100 by whatever. If I remove this and hit save, you see the button shrinks back down automatically because it's no longer being applied. All right, so the other thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and link our JavaScript file while we're at it. So I put that between the closing of the body and the closing of the HTML. JavaScript gets a script tag. And for this, we are going to basically tell it the type so that it knows what kind of file it is. And we're saying text JavaScript. And then we have to give it a source to go look for it at. And this is in, again, path IntelliSense, assets, JS, index.js. And that's all you need for that. That basically tells it where to go find the JavaScript file. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tell this button we want you to be the demo button, right? So in the CSS, we did a .demo, basically meaning it's a class. So inside the opening tag for the button, we type class demo. And as soon as we do that, you see the button change colors, right? I have this nice blue color, a nice little, let me zoom in here so you can see it better. I have this nice blue color. I have this little subtle box shadow. Typical standards, don't go crazy with the box shadow, make it very subtle. And then I have my font, which is the color white. All right. So now, if I want to see what it looks like active, right? So, or if I want to manipulate it, or I want to do other things with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click these three dots in Chrome. I'm going to go More Tools and Developer Tools. Okay, it's going to open this guy up. And I really hope I can zoom this in. I can, good. So I'm going to go to the Elements tab. And so now as I click through here, you can see my code on the left is my code on the right? So I can click this and say I wanted to manipulate some of the style, right? Say I wanted to change the radius, or I wanted to see how it looks, or change it. I can just click in here and just hit my up and down arrow, and you'll watch the button on the left change as I do it, right? So what I do a lot of times is I'll do this and I'll come in here and I'll tweak stuff, right? So all of a sudden I'm like, no, I want to see a 150 high button. Oops, I can't do that because it's higher than that. So I want to do a 200 wide button by a 150 high button, right? There. Again, the same thing. I can click in here and just do the up and down and watch it go. So when you're doing a design, this is a nice thing to have because you can manipulate it and do it in real time. So then what I do is after I get it to where I like it, I just come over to my CSS file and just fill in those properties. So I'm not tweaking the code, hitting save, watching the change. I'm literally just manipulating the file as it's running in the browser to figure out what I like, what I don't like, what works, what doesn't, and then applying that code to the CSS file, and then I'll just rebuild with that updated code. So it's much more in, you know, I can't think of the right word, but it's much more flexible that way. So just wanted to show that. Also, if I want to see what the demo active class looks like, right? Again, also in the browser, if you want to erase all the stuff that you did, you can just hit refresh and it will automatically reload the CSS and HTML and all that as it was in the file. So I can do the same thing here. I can come in here, click the class, and change it to active, and voila, there is what the active button looks like. So a nice, quick, easy way to change the stuff. So I personally love that. All right, so now that we have our CSS linked to the program, or to the program, this is a Crestron demonstration. So now that we have our CSS linked to the index.html and our JavaScript linked, there is one step we have to do before we start looking at the JavaScript, right? We have to fix something in the Crestron comm library in order for it to work correctly in our JavaScript. So in the README, I have the instructions on how to do this, and I'm just going to run through it with you real quick to show you. So it's inside this node modules folder under @Crestron, and then we're going to go to the CRCOM lib. There's only one folder in there, and then the package.json. And we're going to scroll and scroll and scroll all the way down here to the bottom, this type section. So I can show you what will happen. And actually, I won't show you. But basically, if you try and import this into your JavaScript, it's going to crash. And so what we have to do is we have to change some of this code so it imports correctly. So we're going to remove this, and we're going to replace it with build_bundles/CJS/add_types/index.d.ts. And let me tell you, it took me forever to find the answer to this. I mean forever. CJS crcom-lib.js, and another comma at the end of that. All right, and I hit save. Oops. and hit save. So we need to change that in order for it to work. For those of you who do React, you have to do the same thing for it to work in React. All right. So now we can get out of the node modules folder, and we can open up our JavaScript file. All right. So first things first, I'm just going to go over something basic, right? Tying a button into JavaScript. Think of JavaScript as your simple Windows, right? It's where the action from the button is going to actually run something, right? If I just press this button, you know, nothing. And also you can see this is what the this demo.active, this code right here, that's what makes this button do that. But I'm pressing it and nothing's happening, right? Because there's nothing in my JavaScript. There's nothing to tell anything to happen when I press that button. So what I need to do is I need to go into my JavaScript. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to import the Crestron library. I'm just going to do that. I always do this anytime you're importing other libraries. Always want to do this first, right? So this is import star as cr comm lib from, oh, that's an at, not a star. And we're going to say at, and because I have IntelliSense on, it automatically knows that this is something I can import. So I click that, right? So what that does is it says import everything from the communication library. The communication library is essentially how this project talks to the processor. It's your serial joins, your analog joins, your digital joins, which in this world are booleans, meaning true or false. That's doing this import is what tells this project to talk to the control system. How it talks to the control system is the same way. When you load it to the touch panel file, it uses the IP table. It's their communication library handles all that stuff, right? But first, I just want to show you, right? So I want to basically make, when I press this button, do something. So I'm going to say const button equals document. So what document means is the HTML document. In HTML, the term is DOM. The DOM is where all this stuff runs, and I access it by using this document. So I'm going to say document, and I'm going to say query selector. Okay. Query selector basically means what I'm looking for, and I'm looking for the .demo class. Okay. So now I can do stuff with this button. I can say button.add event listener. What add event listener means is I want to listen to anything that's happening with that button. Okay. In this instance, I want to listen to when it's clicked. Okay. So every time it clicks, I want this event listener to fire. And the next thing I'm going to put in is the callback. In simple terms, a callback is what I want to happen when this click event fires. So we're going to create a function inside here, right? And here's the beauty of doing HTML. I'm just going to write console.log. We pressed, if I can spell, the button. Okay. Again, I did Shift Option F, and you see how it just automatically formatted my stuff. So I'm going to hit save. And you'll see here everything changed. All right. So now if I click here and I go to console, right? Hey, look, we pressed the button. So this is an easy way to know if your code is working correctly. By using these console messages, you have an easy way of watching everything that's happening in real time. It's not like doing typical Crestron with VT Pro and Simple, where you have to make the VT Pro, make the Simple, compile, upload everything, run debugger. You just saw how fast it was, right? I made that code And now I hit this button, and then look, it just keeps running up. We press the button. Okay, perfect. So that is how quick and easy it is to do stuff like that. So now let's say I want this button to do something in simple Windows. So let me just remove this console log. So we are going to use crcomm-lib, which again is the Crestron communication library, right? Dot, and I want to do publish event. What publish event does basically says, hey, HTML, send this event to the simple Windows program. Same way subscribe event. Obviously, you wouldn't put this in the event listener. I mean, unless you really wanted to. So your subscribe stuff basically says, hey, listen for things. So I want to do a publish event. All right. So the first argument to publish event is what kind? Do I want a digital? Do I want an analog? Do I want a serial? All right. So I'm going to do B for Boolean, which means digital. The next thing I'm going to put in here is 1, which basically means send it to digital 1 out of the TSW in simple Windows. And then the last value is true, meaning make it high. So it'll go high. Now, obviously, if I want this to act like a button that's just a momentary press, it's not going to work because when it sends it, it's just going to stay high in simple Windows. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a built-in function inside of JavaScript called setTimeout. So what setTimeout does is it basically says, I'm going to take a function. Just so you know, there's 2 ways to write functions in JavaScript. There's the regular function, parentheses, bracket, bracket, and then there's this, which is called an arrow function. So I'm going to use an arrow function. And because I'm only doing one thing inside this arrow function, I don't need the brackets. So I'm going to say crcomm-lib, publish event. And I'm going to say B for Boolean, 1 for digital 1, and I'm going to say false. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to do is put a comma, and I'm going to say 200. So what this command right here says is basically after I send the hi command, wait 200 milliseconds, and then send the false command. So what will happen is when I press this button, what's going to happen is that digital join is going to go high in simple Windows, and then 200 milliseconds later, it's going to go low. As you get better with JavaScript, you will just put this inside of its own function and call it. But that is for another lesson. So I'm just manually putting it in here just to show you. What you will, me personally, what I have realized is I don't even use digitals at all because I handle all the UI stuff inside of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The only thing I ever send a simple Windows program now is analogs. I want to, because I'm doing no user interface logic inside of simple Windows. All I'm doing in simple Windows is controlling things, right? I'm controlling switchers, I'm controlling displays, I'm controlling all this. And I can do all that right from JavaScript without having to do all this stuff in simple. So you could do something like if you change analog on a DM matrix, if you send analog 1, then in simple Windows you could just say, hey, do a compare on analog 1. If it's higher than 0, also send the display on command. Same time, you could technically in here, so if you really just wanted to go full bore with JavaScript, you could say S for string on digital 1, and then in here you could write whatever the command is, and it would literally send, and then in simple Windows you could tie serial 1 to the device on the comm, and it will send the command straight to the device from JavaScript through your simple Windows program. All right. So that is the basic example of, okay, now we have a button. Now we're sending a Boolean command, and it's pulsing inside of simple Windows. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to making a group of buttons. and sending analog values and how we can watch that group of buttons so we know exactly which button is being ran. Okay? All right, so now let's make the group of buttons. Let's make some source buttons. And it's funny, when I switched clips, I realized that I hadn't been using my AirPods the whole time, so it's just the horrible MacBook microphone. So again, I apologize for this. Just trying to make sure I get it done as quick as possible for you guys. All right, so we're going to go into our index.html, and we're going to remove this button. See ya. Again, if I hit save, watch, instantaneous, walks away. And again, I'm getting this error in my console saying uncaught type error, cannot read property add event listener of null. And that's because I still have this in here, right? And I don't need that anymore. So I can either delete it or I can just comment it out. I'm not sure what this command is on Windows, but on a Mac it's command slash. I don't know which slash that is. It's the one under the question mark. They boggle me every time. So I hit command that and you'll see it'll automatically comment it out. Okay. So if I hit save now, you'll see that that error is gone. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a div. Divs in HTML are used all the time. Think of it as a container. So it's a container for things. Divs really come into play when you're dealing with styling using CSS grids or CSS flexbox. I'm not going into those types of things in this. That is a very long video all in itself, and you can check out Brad Traversy's stuff on that if you want, or I can make one too. It doesn't really matter to me. I can make one that's more tailored to touch panel design if you want. So the first thing I'm going to do in this div is I'm going to give it a class, and I will show you why we do that down the road. You can also use this class to style it. So if I wanted to apply styling to this class, it'll put styling on it. So say I wanted it to look a specific way with a different background or border, whatever I want to do, I could do that. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating my buttons. All right, so this is source one. Also, again, I apologize for you Windows users. I don't know what this shortcut is in Windows, but if I do Shift Option down, it will just copy it down. I actually don't know what the shortcut is to auto renumber down, so I'm just gonna I just do it. But again, Shift Option down, Shift Option up copies it up. So quick way to copy an entire line up or down. So hit save. Right there's my 4 awful looking buttons. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make these all class demo. And again, what that does is it basically says, hey buttons, I want you to look like this. All right? Class demo, class demo. Save. So now I got my 4 buttons. I can press them. They get that nice little subtle dip from the active, but nothing's happening, right? Because I have no JavaScript that's saying use them. All right? So now I'm going to go over to my JavaScript. So this gets a little more complicated. And I'm going to try and explain this as easily as possible. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to query the HTML for that sources, right? I'm going to query it for this, okay? So basically what I do is I say document, document dot query selector. Again, query selector. Boy, I can't type. Let's try this again. Document dot query selector. And I'm going to tell it to look for the dot sources. And I'm going to add an event listener to it. Again, the event listener is now listening to this div. And when it listens to that div, it means it's listening to everything inside that div, right? I'll explain this in Crestron VT Pro in a second. So I want to listen for clicks, and a function is going to fire. Again, this function basically means whenever this click happens, do something. Okay, the difference between this and the button up here is I'm pulling in the event. Okay, and you can console, like if you really want to know everything inside of here, you could console.log the event, and it will tell you everything that happens inside here, right? So if I hit save and I hit source one, you're gonna see all this stuff, right? This is everything available because I'm doing this. You see, if you want mouse event, mouse event, mouse event, mouse event, mouse event, mouse event. So again, if you really want to expand on what is possible, just start console logging things and it will tell you everything that's available, right? So, but I want something specific. So I'm going to put an if statement in here, right? And I'm looking for event dot target. Target is basically the piece that was fired. It's not the whole div, it's the specific target that was triggered inside the div. And I want to know the tag name, okay? Tag name is, what was it that fired? Was it a button? Was it an A tag for a website link? Was it an unordered list or a list item? So by doing that, I do triple equals. In JavaScript, it's triple equals. You can do double equals, but it's best practice in JavaScript to do triple equals. The other thing you probably notice if you're coming from the C# world is I don't have to tell anything what it is, right? I don't have to tell it if it's a string, a number, a boolean. JavaScript doesn't care, which is nice but bad because you can break things very easily. In writing this demo code, I was sending it to someone to test, and I realized that I was sending a string to an analog value instead of simple windows, and I'm like, well, why isn't it working? And I was like, oh, duh. Again, because it's JavaScript, it was like, sure, go ahead, send it. All right, so I'm looking for a button press. Okay. Button was pressed. Yep. All right, and then this next thing, event.stop not immediate. Event.stop propagation. What this line basically says is, for example, if I had other stuff in here, or if it was multi-tiered, it basically says, okay, listen to this one thing and then don't go any further, right? Don't go up the levels, just stay right here. Grab that and be done, right? So if I save this, now you'll see when I click, button was pressed, button was pressed, button was pressed, button was pressed. So what this code is doing is it's listening to this div right here, and it's firing every time I hit a button inside of here, right? Because I'm saying if the event that was fired was from a button tag, do something, okay? Think of this div as like a dynamic list inside of VT Pro, right? So you have a dynamic list of buttons. And inside that you have like your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 buttons. I'm basically doing the same thing. I have a div of buttons that are called sources, and inside of that I have the 4 buttons, okay? So before we can do anything though, because I'm basically listening to all 4 buttons, I have no way of knowing which button was pressed. So we have to add some more stuff to this button, okay? First thing we're gonna do is give each button an ID. So I'm going to call this one source 1. Again, no spaces. And I'm going to give it a value of 1. Okay. So when doing this, ID allows me to know which button was pressed. Okay. And value is the value I want to send. So by putting value in here, I'm basically saying when I press this button, I'm going to access this value inside of JavaScript and say, send that value along. Okay, so this one will be ID equals source 2 and value equals 2. As you get better with this stuff, you will realize that you can dynamically populate most of this. You don't have to do it this way. You'll learn how to bring in JSON data to automatically fill some of this stuff with JavaScript. But again, say that you made this file, right? And I know it never happens, but the installers didn't hook it up according to the drawing. So source 1's actually not on input 1, it's on input 6. Easy peasy. I just go in here and say your value 6 now. So now analog 6 is going to go to the processor. I don't have to go into simple Windows or VT Pro and do all that stuff, recompile, whatever. I can do this, rerun my build, and send it to the touch panel. If you were doing it another method where you use JSON and you fetch it, it would just do it automatically. You could modify that JSON, it'll fetch it, and it'll just work. Okay, so this is all the required information I need, right? I now have the class demo, I now have an ID, and I now have a value. So now we're ready to move into JavaScript, okay? This all stays, right? Because I'm listening for everything to happen. But now what I need to do is I need to say, hey, I need to send it to Crestron, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a function, and I'm going to call it handle source press. And I'm going to pass in, you'll see this all the time, web developers are lazy. I'm one of them. E, short for event. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to take this value because it's coming in as a string, and I need to convert it to an integer so that when I send it to the analog inside of Crestron, it's actually an analog. So I'm going to say const value. FYI, in JavaScript, const means you set it once, and if you try and change it later, it'll just break the code. You could use var, and you could use let. Var and let allow you to change it. So if I set the value once, I can reassign that value later. If I use const, I can't, and I don't want to change it. So I'm going to say parse, oops, it's lowercase, parse int, and I'm going to look for e.target.value. And I'm going to use the 10. I'm horrible at explaining this stuff, but it basically means base 10. So e.target.value, what that is saying is I want to look at the target that was pressed and I want to know its value, which means this guy right here. I want that value. Give me that value. Okay? All right, so I need to take this value and I just did Crestron. So I'm going to do crcomm lib.publish event. Now we've done Boolean, we've done serial, now we're doing analog. So that is an N. I'm going to send it to analog value 1. Again, you can make this number whatever you want. It's the same as an analog join number in VT Pro, and this is where it comes out on the TSW inside of simple. And I'm going to pass it the value, right? If I hit save, that's it. If that's all we wanted to do, if you press this button like this, oh, you can see I still have my thing in here. Let me get rid of that. I forgot. I still have the console log in there. So I actually need to tell when we fire this, handle source press. And I need to pass in the, I believe it's event. Yes, the full event. So what you might see some people do, so I'm passing in the full event. Technically, if I didn't want to do this right here, I could just pass in event target that value. Then I wouldn't have to do this. And I could name this whatever I want, right? I could say source number and pass it source number, because I still need to parse it. Okay, just another way you do it. There's, like I say, there's a million ways to do this stuff. Depending on the day of the week, I do it different. All right, so now if I hit save, so now that's it, right? So if I hit source 1 comes in here, right? It comes inside of here. This says, hey, it was a button. Run this function. This function says, okay, take the value of that button, right? The value right here. Convert it to an actual number because right now it's a string. and then send it to the processor on analog value 1. So inside of your processor, analog 1 will be the number of whatever button you pressed, right? That's it. If you don't want anything else to happen, you're done. We're going to expand upon that a little bit more, right? So everyone's kind of used to doing everything inside of simple windows, right? Your interlocks, your toggles, your everything. So your entire user interface is driven by simple. By moving to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you don't have to do that anymore. We can build it right in, okay? So I'm just going to make it look like an interlock. So the first thing I'm going to do, so this will get a little bit more in the weeds, so I'll do my best. The source code has the comments in it. I'm not sure how well I'm going to explain this. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is var els, basically meaning it's short for elements. I'm going to say document dot get elements by class name, and I'm going to search for demo active. Okay. So what I'm doing here is basically saying, hey, source press was pressed. Go through all the documents inside of that div, or actually in the whole document, but so this is where class naming is very important, right? So go through anything and see if it has a class name named demo active. And if it does, return this, okay? But I can't do anything with this just yet because it's an HTML collection. So I need to turn it into an array. And the reason I'm doing this first is to create the interlock look, right? So in this next one, I'm doing array from the elements. Okay, and what this basically says is take this HTML collection of elements that I found and convert it into an array. Because then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a for each, right? For each basically means for every item in the array, do something to it. So it'll just loop through them. This is much better than just doing a regular for loop. Regular for loop, you know, you'd have to do I equals 0, I greater than, less than, whatever the length, I plus plus. And I'm just going to do a for each. Okay, and inside of this, I'm going to access the EL, okay, short for the element, right? And then I'm going to do the arrow function. Okay, so I've converted an array from the HTML collection. Now I'm looping through that array, and inside this function, inside this loop, I'm accessing the specific element at that time, right? So then what I want to do is I'm going to do document dot get element by ID, and then I want the element dot ID. I'm going to set its new class name to demo. Okay. Again, command shift option F. Let me see how it just auto formatted that for me. Okay, so now what this is doing is it's saying, okay, in this specific element from the array, I want you to grab the ID that fired, and I want you to change its class name to demo, right? So if the button, if any of the buttons were green, I want you to change its class name to demo, which will automatically turn that button back to blue. So I'm controlling the look of this stuff by changing the class name of that item inside of JavaScript. Okay. So I do that first because I need to clear it before I set the new one. If I put this next line of code first, it would change the new one to green, and then it would just move them all back to blue. So it wouldn't work because JavaScript code is synchronous. I hope I said that right. All right, so I'm going to do document dot get element by ID. All right. So we're going to use this little tick mark like this instead of quotations. Reason we do that is so that I can access variables inside. So the tick is the little key next to the one in the tab, right? So I'm looking for source, and then $, bracket, bracket, and e dot target dot value. Okay, basically what this code is saying, okay, this fired, all right, I want to get the element with the ID of source and then the value, right? So if I press button 1, the value is 1. My ID is source 1. If I press 2, my ID is source 2. Okay? Same, 3 and 4. So basically what this line of code is doing is it's saying, okay, we pressed this, right? I know that my e.target.value is, if I press button 1, the value is 1. If I pressed it 2, it's button 3. So I'm saying, hey, document, get me the element that has the ID, src, and then whatever number I pressed. So in this case, it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, right? And I'm going to do the same thing that I did up here, except now I'm going to say dot class name equals demo active. Okay. So I've gone through, grabbed everything that had demo active. Anything that was demo active, I sent back to demo. Now I'm going in and I'm saying, go find the element with the ID src and whatever number was pressed. So that's, again, with this ticks and this $, brackets, it's translating into src and then the number of whatever was pressed. And then I do dot class name equals demo active, basically meaning take this guy and change the class to demo active. And I hit save, right? Everything re-renders, and voila. So now I'm sending code to the processor on analog value 1, and I've basically made a simple little interlock inside of JavaScript. Again, this is very, very, very basically written. Obviously, this is just to kind of show how things work. There's a ton more to expand upon with this. There's ways to write some of this stuff in other JavaScript files and link it in. So I don't have to write all this stuff every time, right? I can make a function that has it inside of it and just trigger it every time the button's pressed. But I wanted to show the bare bones so you can see the guts, see how it works. And so there you see it's working. So that is basically it. So we've done everything. We've tested it. We know it's working. So now the next step is to actually build it and send it to the touch panel. So onto that we go. Okay, so I've gone back to my terminal window because everything else that we're going to do from this point on is inside the terminal window. If you can hear the dog barking, I apologize. I live in a condo and the dog park is right by me. So the first thing I need to do, right, is I still see that my server is running. I need to stop the server. And again, this is one of those, I'm not sure what it is in Windows. In Mac, it's Control-C. I'm not sure if that's the same in Windows. Maybe someone can comment in to help me out with those Windows shortcuts. All right. So I've stopped the server, right? Now I'm ready to take everything I've made and get it ready for the touch panel. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run npm run build. Okay. Now what's happening is this parcel is running and it's going in and it's looking at all the JavaScript and everything, and it's pulling in everything it needs for this to run and work and putting it into a bunch of JavaScript files and CSS and HTML in a concise way. So that's it, it's done. So if I go back over to my project, I have this new folder called dist. And there it is. That is what spits everything out. This it won't be human readable. I mean, you could try, but it's not going to make much sense to most people. But basically, what it does is it imports what we need from the Crestron communication library. It builds everything dynamically so that it runs most efficiently inside of whatever we're sending it to. Okay. So let me go back here. So the next thing I need to do is I need to npm run build archive. All right, so what happened there is the Crestron CLI took a hold. It went to that dist folder that Parcel built, and it made the touch panel file out of it. So if I come over back to Visual Studio Code, you see I now have this TSW folder, and there is the example. Obviously, if I open this inside of Visual Studio Code, it has no idea what it is. But that's it. So now I can take this CH5Z file and send it to my touch panel. I'm doing this example video for my house, so I can't send it anywhere. But I'm sure they'll go over it in masters for you. Many people use the CLI to send it. You could use the CLI, you could use Toolbox. I mean, any of the methods work. Sometimes I have issues with the CLI sending it to the touch panel, so I'll just load Toolbox and send it. So that's it. I hope this was informational for you guys and gals. Hope you got a lot out of it. Any comments or whatever, please let me know below. You're also all welcome to send me an email. My email is at the beginning of the presentation. More than happy to help out. And you can also hit me up on the Discord. I'm really trying to get the AV and Crestron community to adopt to be more like the web developer community, where we all work together, we all help each other. Because when we work together and we help each other, we can really make much better stuff and advance in a lot more ways. So again, thanks guys. I'll be in the class with you all this week, next week, whatever, it's Sunday at 7:30. I'll be in the class, hopefully helping out, answering some questions. So until next time, have a great one. Thanks guys.